Hello and welcome to another installment of The Candidate, the show that tries to give you, the Zimbabwean, the best opportunity to make an informed decision these coming elections. As you know, to vote is your right, and to make the right choice, again, is your prerogative. And that is why we've been interviewing every candidate, giving them the opportunity to interact with you, the Zimbabwean, to find out a little bit more about why they should be in place. And now today, we're happily joined by Elisabeth Valerio, who is the president of the United Zimbabwe Alliance, who is here to talk us through her campaign and what she has in store for Zimbabwe. Ms. Valerio, thank you for coming onto the show.
Thank you for having me.
My standard first question that I ask everyone is, if you look at that camera over there, that is Zimbabwe. For 2 minutes or less, tell us why you think you should be the next president.
Sure. In terms of credibility, I most likely am the most credible candidate on the ballot today. I say that with great confidence because although we've had candidates that already are in government or perhaps have contested in the past for many times, I am the only candidate coming to this election with a new vision, a new perspective for Zimbabwe. I've spent the last 20 years of my life working to restore and uplift the dignity of our continent, Africa. I've also spent the last 10 years living in the wilderness in Hwange, working with local communities, working within my own region to ensure that the lives of the people in the area where I live are uplifted, whether it's through education, awareness and understanding through knowledge, and also making sure that the sector that I represent, which is the tourism sector, is constantly growing and creating jobs and improving and contributing to the economy. But more important than all of that, the fact that I have credentials, I'm a scientist, I'm a businesswoman, I'm an entrepreneur. More important than that is the fact that I am someone who is committed to leading the third largest political party in Zimbabwe, a party that has established itself throughout Zimbabwe. I think many of the Zimbabweans actually watching this, you've met me. I've been to almost every constituency throughout our country. I've spent time listening to the people of Zimbabwe, and I now lead the United Zimbabwe Alliance, a political party that is ready and prepared to lead as part of the next government of Zimbabwe.
Thank you. So listening to you talk about your credentials and your credibility as a candidate, you spoke a lot about the time that you spent in Hwange, also a lot about the time that you spent in tourism. If some people might say that you're probably better suited to be a CEO of a large NGO or a tourism-based company than president of Zimbabwe, do you think your credentials in terms of what you've done, in terms of your political acumen, you have what it takes to actually be president?
Absolutely, I do have the credentials and the acumen, and I'm glad you brought that up. So 2 years ago, maybe, you'd say I'd be better suited as Minister of Tourism. I am the chairperson for the Tourism Association in Hwange, and I've done a lot in the tourism sector, but that's not all that I've done in my career, in my life. I also currently am working to develop programs across Zimbabwe to inspire young people, whether it's individuals who want to start businesses, whether it's scientific research, because I am a biochemist with a scientific background, developing products that could turn into medicines for our country. I have a public health background, so I am multifaceted as a professional person coming to this this campaign. But more than that, in the last 2 years, I have become a politician who has the capability and capacity to lead. I have led a political party that started with only 30 members. Now we are well established with members throughout this country and in diaspora. We have on the ballot candidates in over 60 constituencies today. And that is not a tourism-focused endeavor. That is someone who is understanding and fully capable of leading the next government of Zimbabwe. We're forming a government in waiting.
But as a politician, you would say that you spent the bulk of your political time starting a party, or have you spent the bulk of your political time actually getting runs on the board? I think what people are looking for are evidence of getting things done on a national level.
Sure.
Do you feel that your party, as young as it is, even though it has grown as big as it is, can actually do things on a national level?
Absolutely. So first of all, because of the work we've done, the basic groundwork that we've done, we spent a lot of time consulting with citizens, and I'm saying citizens on the ground as well as our diaspora, which is very capable in terms of the brain trust that we have. And so we have been establishing our manifesto based on what the citizens are telling us. So understanding that you can't run the country unless you know what needs to be fixed or what it takes to actually run the country. You've got to work collectively with people, and you've got to understand the different environments, whether it's different provinces, the constituencies that we will be representing as government. So first of all, in terms of engagement, we've been working very, very proactively on what we call citizens engagement. But in addition to that, I've also spent a lot of time understanding, really the shortfalls of the current government and trying to understand what is going wrong and why we are in the place that we are in today. Because Zimbabwe, as most people I think will admit, is not where we would have imagined it. When you are looking at a country that now is 43 years past independence, we're not progressing to the nation that we would have been. We should be a thriving industrial nation that sets the barometer for the entire continent of Africa. But instead, we're limping along, and we're constantly that country that's looking for help and is looked upon with pity.
But I think every political candidate is meant to say that. Every political candidate can't speak highly of their competition in for lack of a better way of saying it. Mm-hmm. But the thing that's always missing from that speech or rhetoric is not so much what's wrong, but how are you going to change things? How are you going to be different? So in terms of if you're saying that there's things that need to be changed and your opinion is that things are not in a good place right now, how are you planning to actually get it to a better place, the tangible steps?
Sure. So we've started by creating really the roadmap towards changing Zimbabwe, and that's by writing a manifesto, a very comprehensive manifesto. And it encompasses 4 different aspects of what we will do. So first of all, putting in place accountability systems. And so under the scope of accountability, we've got to look at what we need to do to ensure that we have a government that is transparent, that is really separating itself from the judicial system, for example, ensuring that corruption is dealt with. And so there are tangible aspects of what we have outlined in the manifesto, whether it's doing a complete review of the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, looking at where we are facing shortfalls in terms of the ability to prosecute on cases that come to the fore in terms of corruption. So there's a tremendous amount of work we've done in terms of researching and understanding where our corruption, status, the status of this nation, is falling short in terms of the institution that should be holding it, putting an end to corruption.
So your strategy would be to first fix governance issues, in your opinion, that are lacking or are corrupt, as you would say. And then that is the basis of which Zimbabwe will then become a better place.
So that's one aspect of our accountability approach, and ultimately we are a political party that's not coming in saying we want to completely change everything that is Zimbabwean. We've got institutions that should be working effectively. The Constitution clearly defines what we should be doing. So we want to align all of our governance policies with the Constitution and take a look at what's going wrong within the framework of what already exists. And certainly coming to the table as well with new ideas. So the second aspect of what we will work on in terms of moving Zimbabwe forward is advancement. So under the theme of advancement, that encompasses all of the economic elements of what we need to do, the educational sector, the infrastructure that needs to be worked on, all of what drives Zimbabwe forward and what's not happening at the moment. So when you think of from an economic standpoint, we certainly are a country that most nations are, reluctant to engage with because of our policy frameworks, the inconsistencies in our governance. When I say that, again, I'm speaking in terms of the government's position on fiscal policies. I see your hesitation in that regard. And then you look at our educational system. I mean, ultimately, we've got young people today who are going to classrooms with teachers who maybe aren't even equipped to teach them some of the core subjects that they should be learning: science, technology, engineering, and math.
But if we're to focus in on one of those things, right?
Sure.
So again, you're articulating what you feel is the problem at the moment. But what we're missing is how are you going to be different? So of course, 30 minutes is not a long time to discuss everything, but let's focus in on one thing. Let's talk about education.
Okay.
So you're saying that education right now could be improved. How would you improve education?
There are a number of ways. First of all, you've got to address the issue that teachers are not being paid well in Zimbabwe. So you can't expect a person to go to work every day to teach your children if they're not rewarded and excited about the job that they have. If you go to some of the rural areas, the teachers' accommodation facilities are not adequate. They're leaving their homes in the city to go and teach children in our rural facilities. The classrooms are not well equipped. So we are going to ensure that we have world-class classrooms. We are going to ensure that we review the curriculum and ensure that children are getting, a world quality education. So I'll give you a prime example. In the region where I live, most of the kids when I first moved there were not learning science, technology, engineering, and math. They were not learning physics, chemistry, biology, because the teachers weren't equipped to teach them. What we did was we actually brought teachers together, had workshops, and had to teach the teachers the curriculum. Most children in Zimbabwe today are being quizzed on subjects. They're not being taught, so they're not actually getting an education.
And what evidence do you have of that? Because, we do pride ourselves on education, on being a very illiterate and educated country. So when you're saying that, kids are not being taught, they're being quizzed, what evidence do you have of that, and what does that actually mean? So
we do have the fortunate few who go to private schools. Perhaps they're still getting a relatively good education, but we were the cream of the crop in terms of education. Everyone knows Zimbabweans were the best educated. The kids that go to the schools where I live, and I'm working with 17 secondary schools, most of them get exam questions and they don't get an actual lesson on the subject, because the teachers, you find sometimes it's a teacher who is taught religious studies, but they're being now told that they should teach physics. We don't have enough teachers in Zimbabwe, so we need to bring our teachers back to Zimbabwe. They're literally leaving as quickly as they can to go and look for jobs outside the border. But we need to again look at just the bigger picture as well in terms of just the school system. We can't have schools in the cities which are better quality than the ones in the rural areas. Every child should be going to a school with good quality, and we will be providing free education for primary school because we want every child in Zimbabwe to have the same start. When they're starting school, you can't have that disadvantage.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to take we're going to have to take our first break. But when we come back, we're going to examine, the aspect of free education. And when we come back, we're also going to look a little bit more into the idea of governance as seen by the UZA. Welcome back to The Candidate. We have Elisabeth Valerio, who's the president of the UZA, the United Zimbabwe Alliance, who's been outlining some of her plans, and we've been zeroing in on education as a platform to see how you are planning to, change the country as you see that it needs to be changed. So one of the things you mentioned, you talked about how teachers are not paid enough. You spoke about how children are being quizzed and not taught. You also spoke about wanting to have world-class classrooms, which also needs its own definition, but we won't get into that. How are you planning to afford, especially when you talk about free education? These are great initiatives, but how are you planning to afford it? It sounds very expensive.
Sure. Well, I think we need to go back to the fundamentals. How many companies in Zimbabwe do you know that are creating jobs? That are most of the Zimbabwean citizens that I speak to on an average day are saying, I'm trying to find a job and I can't find a job, or I'm looking for a job outside Zimbabwe. People are desperate to leave. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to make sure that we have an environment where companies can thrive. As the United Zimbabwe Alliance, we're already starting to incubate companies. We have 30 companies right now that are in incubation phase, and these are across various sectors. They're led by Zimbabwean entrepreneurs. These are individuals with ideas ranging from, how do we solve our, biodiesel needs, all the way through to, can we produce our own medicines, our own skincare, our own makeup in Zimbabwe? It's a range of different types of companies. But when you have a thriving industrial sector, you now have an economy that is bolstered, of course, by a tax base that then ensures that the government has the ability to provide for all of the programs that they're responsible for. And that is what we are not having right now, is we do not have an economy that is really feeding directly into our government framework and ensuring that we can provide for all of the various.
Let's just take a step back. So my question was, how are we going to afford your education program,
yes.
which is going to be free education for primary school, increased pay for teachers, et cetera, et cetera. How are you going to pay for that? Are you saying that your idea is you're going to try and offload that expense onto companies that are willing? So you'll get a number of companies, the list will grow, and then they will pay for it?
Is it not a requirement that anyone who owns a company should actually be paying taxes? Should we not have a tax base in Zimbabwe?
Zimbabweans would argue that we're actually overtaxed. Are you going to be a president
well, that needs to be addressed
taxes?
too. That needs to be addressed too. You can't have a high tax rate and a few companies having to carry the entire nation's taxes. That's not going to work. So it has to be a completely different system for Zimbabwe, where we have many companies that are
all
thriving.
Companies that are registered pay taxes, not a few companies that carry the load.
And that's exactly my point. Every company should be, but we don't have enough companies. Most of our major companies have collapsed. Even before 2002, we had lost most of our companies. I mean, look at Zisco Steel and all of these other major producers. We don't have them anymore. Air Zimbabwe, National Railways. I mean, look, are they really productive companies that you could say are viable and contributing to our economy? The change that needs to happen is we need a thriving economy whereby there are companies throughout our country. But not only that, we need citizens who are earning a really good living wage, to where their income is reportable, and they're able to also contribute towards the productivity of our nation.
So just following.
So all of these things are what, in a normal country, contribute towards being able to make sure that you have medical care facilities, you have local service governance that provides you with things like water, waste management. All of these things that we're not getting in Zimbabwe is because we have a crippled economy. We do not see the progression of our nation, because a lot of it is tied to the fact that we don't have a stable business environment.
So you're saying, so in your estimation, country's crippled, economy's crippled, we don't have all of these things. I mean, one can argue that perhaps that's a matter of opinion, but what then is your route? Because we veered off the education path, fair enough, but then what then is your route to get those things? There has to be a plan.
Sure.
Stating it is one thing, but there has to be a plan. So what is the plan?
Fortunately, we've got brilliant people in Zimbabwe, around the world, from Zimbabwe, who are more than capable of reinvigorating our economic sector. And those individuals need to come to the table. They need to come to the table with confidence, knowing that they have a government that's not going to be in the way of progress. And that is really all it's going to take, is us creating an environment that is conducive for businesses to thrive. I think even throughout Zimbabwe, those watching today know, if you are in business, oftentimes you're struggling just to make things happen. All of the licensing issues, all of the regulations, the restrictions, government needs to get out of the way and allow the entrepreneurial people to lead. We also need to make sure that the entrepreneurs, or the Zimbabwean people, are at the fore of developing this country. Government doesn't need to do all of the development work for our nation.
But how do you fix a present issue that all governments have faced present in this country, which is that as much as the Zimbabwean citizen does talk about the issues that they are facing, they also seldom talk about their contribution to it. So for example, if you speak to Zimra, they speak often about how a lot of people don't pay their taxes.
Yes.
In fact, a lot of businesses, their first instance is to try and avoid tax. You talk about a lot of different contributing factors to how local governance is done, and citizens aren't playing their part in that. So what would be your strategy in ensuring that you overcome these issues where the citizens also have to be held accountable as much as anyone else?
Yeah, you raise a really important point, because I think ultimately a lot of people also look to government and say, government's supposed to fix all my problems and aid me or assist me. I think we do have to work on educating the citizens of Zimbabwe and help them to understand that every single person has a role to play. The challenge we are facing right now is most Zimbabweans are barely making it. They're living from day to day. A mother pamsika, is selling tomatoes just to be able to buy dinner tonight. People are not in a position where they have that expendable income to be able to actually pay the taxes. And therefore people are struggling and saying, how can I avoid this? So I think we need to go back to the basics and ensure that as we start to rebuild our economy, we are providing mechanisms that support entrepreneurs. We've got a lot of people in the agricultural sector right now. They're struggling just to be able to make sure that they have the yield, to be able to make a profit, to pay their employees or their workers who are on the farms. Like, we need to look at what we need to, what needs to be put in place to support them, whether it's subsidizing some of the work that they're doing, providing, equipment, loans, innovating within our country. But it all starts again with us, bringing everyone to the table. The industrial sector has to be part of this conversation.
Thank you. And when we come back in our third and final segment, we're going to look into a little bit more, again, about governance and bringing people together. More when we return. Welcome back to The Candidate. We are talking to the president of the UZA, the United Zimbabwe Alliance, Elisabeth Valerio, who has been unpacking some of her plans that she would be executing once she is president. Now, when we're talking about executing, we're talking about governance. We're talking about being able to get things done politically. As much as it is noble to mention things, there's still a avenue that must be taken. As part of a democracy, we work in a system where all parties, even though they may not have the presidential seat, still play a contributing role.
Absolutely.
So how many seats have you won? How many constituencies are you in control of? How did you guys perform, or have you performed in the past?
So we didn't perform as well as we wanted to, because many of our candidates were rejected by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. We are in court right now still trying to resolve those issues and hoping that some of our candidates will be added back to the ballot. So we were hoping for a majority, but we are in 61 constituencies. We have 31 confirmed MPs on the ballot, and we also have councillors that are at a number of wards throughout those 61 constituencies. And then, of course, we have a presidential candidate now, the only woman on the ballot.
So if we are now looking at your ability to get things done,
sure.
It's obviously a lot of things get done better when you are able to have a party that can pull majority. Do you think that you have that kind of party, or shouldn't people rather hinge their bets on a majority party that can actually get the things done that you're speaking of?
We've had a majority party for many years, and we're not getting things done, in my opinion. So I think it's time for us to do something very, very different as Zimbabweans and come up with a new approach. And that is to change your president, work with a president that is committed to taking back Zimbabwe for Zimbabweans. But in addition to that, as a president who is responsible and wants to do the right thing, I will ensure that I have a cabinet that is representative of the interests of the people of Zimbabwe. And so, of course, the expertise of these individuals should make sure it addresses the needs of our country in terms of making sure we get the job done. But in addition to that, I'm not going to be looking at the cabinet purely on partisan lines. My job is to make sure that we have the best people sitting at the table to lead this nation. If we are not the majority, which based on the statistics now, it's not looking very good for us. I will also, as a political party, we at the core of our ideology also believe that a politically plural Zimbabwe is good for our country. You will never have a party or a government that is comprised of one party only. And so I need to ensure that we are unifying all individuals and representatives in government, because at the end of the day, our responsibility, our job is to report to and be accountable to the citizens of Zimbabwe. So I will set the tone from the head of this nation as president, that every member of parliament is accountable to the citizens of Zimbabwe. They are supposed to have been all along, but most of you as Zimbabweans, I know, will not have actually had the opportunity to even interact with your MPs. We need to change that dynamic. So I'll work very hard to unify our government and to ensure that everyone is really moving in the same direction. But I want to also add that given the fact that we don't have the majority in terms of MPs at the moment, a lot of independent candidates are now looking at UZA, the United Zimbabwe Alliance, and we're having conversations with individuals who are seeing us as the new alternative government, because we truly are a viable new party.
So what would you say to people who would suppose that perhaps maybe there's a lot of work that you still need to do to actually establish a party? In establishing a party, you have an established party. In establishing a party and further developing the party, and rather than gunning for the top seat so quickly, you'd rather maybe build more momentum.
Sure.
Is this part of the way that you get your name out there, or are you sincerely trying to be president right now?
I am meant to be president of Zimbabwe. My mother was the first woman in Africa to run for president in this country. She opposed Mugabe. And I think on some level this was meant for me. She planted the seeds, very small scale grassroots party. We're a very established political party. We know where our members are, and we are very, very confident that I can become president of Zimbabwe. I will also just add that, at the end of the day, we don't have the time to waste. We don't have 5 more years. Zimbabwe we cannot afford 5 more years of the current government. It's time for us to change our circumstances in Zimbabwe. 43 years is enough. I worry about what Zimbabwe will look like in 5 years if we allow the current government to continue to exploit this country. Zimbabwe right now is not for the Zimbabwean citizens. There are foreigners coming in and exploiting our natural resources that should be empowering our people, that should be elevating and improving our lives. So I don't think Zimbabwe has 5 years to wait for me to then develop into a president. I'm already a presidential candidate, and I am here and ready.
Makes sense. And again, every candidate who comes on here has their opinion, and they express their opinion, and everyone always feels that they will be able to do a better job, and you're supposed to feel like that. But in conclusion, my last question to you actually is not speaking to me.
Sure.
We've had more of a conversation. Again, I want to point you to that camera over there. And just to close us off with one important point that you'd want Zimbabweans to know as to what would make you different as president.
Well, what would make me different? I think I'll actually start by first reminding Zimbabweans that please take the elections very seriously. People died for this opportunity for you to vote. So please take advantage of this. Every 5 years, you're given the opportunity to choose a new president. I am a very different presidential candidate, but please don't focus on what I look like. Focus on the policies that the United Zimbabwe Alliance is bringing to our nation. We have a comprehensive manifesto. I encourage you to get a copy of that, read it, question it, ask the representatives that are in your constituencies. We do have people on the ground where you live. Speak with them and get to know our party manifesto. I am a political representative who is here to unify. From the very first day, the symbol that we have as UZA was all about bringing together Zimbabwe. We are saying, let's unite as we build Zimbabwe. Ngatibatanei tichiwaka Zimbabwe. Asibambaneni sisaka iZimbabwe.
Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing how you perform in the elections that are coming up. And for those of you who are watching at home, there you have it. The UZA has come to speak to you, to give you an opportunity to be informed on what their position would be and how they would want to lead this country. The choice is still yours. Everyone has a right to vote, and it should be everyone's urgent and express need to want to express that right. So thank you very much for coming to the studio.
Thank you.
We'll speak to you another time.
Thanks for having me. Thank you again.
Thank you everyone who was watching at home.